My name is Alex. I'm 28 years old. And last Christmas Eve, my own flesh and blood put me in handcuffs while my parents sipped vintage red wine. I thought that was the end of my story. But before I tell you about the courtroom shocker that destroyed the Sterling family legacy, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's go back to that freezing night in Chicago. The snow was coming down hard, thick white flakes sticking to the cracked windshield of my beat-up Ford. The heater had died a week prior, and I was shivering. Not just from the cold, but from that familiar knot of dread that tightened in my stomach every time I had to go home. I turned onto the gravel driveway of the Sterling estate. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a fortress. The iron gates swung open slowly, almost threateningly. And there, parked perfectly in front of the marble fountain, was the family fleet. My father Robert's gleaming Rolls-Royce Phantom. My mother Eleanor's convertible Mercedes. And, of course, my brother Julian's brand-new Porsche 911. My car looked like a pile of scrap metal next to those mechanical beasts. I took a deep breath, glancing at my reflection in the rearview mirror. "You can do this, Alex," I whispered to myself. "It's just one dinner. Eat, smile, give the gifts, and get out." I was the black sheep of the Sterling family. While my father was a ruthless real estate tycoon and my brother, Julian, was the golden child. A future police chief praised by the entire city. I was just a landscape architect. I liked planting trees, designing parks, making the concrete jungle a little greener. To my father, that wasn't a career. It was a joke. I stepped inside. The air was warm but suffocating, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and fresh pine. A 10-foot Christmas tree stood towering in the grand foyer, shimmering with real gold ornaments. "Look who it is, the stranger returns," Julian's voice boomed. He stood there, swirling a glass of scotch, wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my rent. Julian always looked at me like I was a stain on his Italian leather shoes. "Hey, Julian," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Merry Christmas." My father sat at the head of the long dining table, not even bothering to look up from his financial newspaper. My mother, Eleanor, drifted in from the kitchen. She flashed that perfect, practice smile she used for socialite magazine covers. "Alex, you made it," she said, but she didn't hug me. Her eyes scanned my outfit with mild disdain. "I was hoping you'd wear the suit I sent you." "It was a little tight, Mom," I lied. The truth was, I had sold it to cover my rent last month because my firm was going through a rough patch. Dinner was a slow-motion torture session. My father started bragging about his new resort project, where he'd bulldozed a forest to build a golf course. Julian droned on about his drug busts, about how fast he was gunning for a promotion. "What about you, Alex?" my father asked suddenly, his steel-gray eyes finally piercing me. "Still playing in the dirt? When are you going to get a real job and bring home a decent salary?" "I love my work, Dad," I replied, gripping my silver fork until my knuckles turned white. "I just finished designing a therapeutic garden for the children's hospital." Julian scoffed. "A therapeutic garden? Sounds fancy. But does it help you buy a car that you don't have to push to start?" The whole table erupted in laughter, except for me. I swallowed the lump of anger in my throat. I was used to this. It had been this way for 28 years. Suddenly, sirens cut through the silence. Red and blue lights flashed through the stained glass windows, sweeping across the luxurious dining room. "What on earth?" my mother asked, placing her wine glass down with a tremble. Julian stood up, his demeanor shifting instantly. He went from arrogant brother to authoritative cop. "Let me check. Probably just some of the boys from the precinct stopping by." He walked out the front door, and seconds later, he returned flanked by 2 uniformed officers. But he wasn't looking at our parents. He was looking straight at me. It was a cold, predatory stare I had never seen before. "Alexander Sterling," Julian said, his voice hard. "Stand up." "What? Why?" I stood up, confused, my napkin drifting to the floor. "We received an anonymous tip regarding the possession of illegal narcotics at this address," specifically in a blue Ford, Julian said, unclipping a pair of handcuffs from his belt. What are you talking about? I stammered. My car? I don't touch that stuff. You know that. Check the vehicle, Julian ordered the other two officers. The whole family poured out onto the front porch. The wind slapped my face, but I was sweating. The officers popped the trunk of my rusty car. They rummaged through my gardening tools. Got it, Sergeant, one officer shouted. He held up a large Ziploc bag filled with white powder. It had been wedged under the spare tire. The world stopped spinning. My ears rang. No, that's impossible, I screamed, lunging forward, but Julian shoved me back. That's not mine. Someone put that there. Julian didn't say a word. He wrenched my arms behind my back, ratcheting the cold steel cuffs onto my wrists. The metallic click echoed loudly in the silent Christmas night. What are you doing? I yelled, turning desperately to my parents. Dad, Mom, you know me. I would never do this. I looked at my father, hoping for a shred of trust, an instinct of protection. He was my dad, for God's sake. But Robert Sterling just stood there, his face purple with rage. But not at the police. He was furious at me. You disgrace, he hissed through clenched teeth. I knew you were a failure, but I didn't think you were a criminal. You are soiling the Sterling name. Dad, listen to me. I'm being framed, I begged. I turned to my mother. She had her hand over her mouth, tears welling up. But when our eyes locked, she looked away. She glanced toward the neighbor's house, where Mr. Harrison, Dad's biggest business partner, was peering over the fence. She was more afraid of the scandal than she was for her son. Mom! My voice cracked. Get him out of here, my father ordered, waving his hand like he was swatting a fly. I don't have a son. Julian leaned close to my ear as he shoved my head down to force me into the back of the squad car. His breath smelled expensive scotch. Merry Christmas, little brother, he whispered, a smirk ghosting across his lips. Don't worry about the inheritance. I'll take good care of it for you. The door slammed shut. I was trapped in a cage watching through the glass. I saw my father pat Julian on the back, as if comforting the good son for having the tough job of arresting his junkie brother. I saw my mother being helped back inside to escape the chill. No one looked back at me. As the cruiser rolled away, taking me from the only life I knew, hot tears streamed down my face, mixing with a burning hatred in my chest. I knew this wasn't a mistake. This was a setup. And my own family had pulled the trigger. County jail on Christmas Eve has a specific smell I will never forget. Cheap bleach mixed with stale sweat and hopelessness. They stripped me of my clothes, handed me a baggy orange jumpsuit, and threw me into a cramped holding cell with two other men. I curled up on the bottom bunk, the mattress so thin the cold steel frame dug into my ribs. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the images of the Sterling mansion, but my mind drifted to other painful memories. This wasn't the first time I'd been the sacrificial lamb. I remembered being 10 years old. Julian, 16 at the time, had stolen Dad's vintage car for a joyride and smashed the front end into an oak tree. When Dad came home, face red with fury, Julian had pointed a finger at me. It was Alex, Dad. He was playing with the emergency brake and the car rolled. I was just a skinny kid, bewildered and crying. I shook my head, but Dad didn't listen. He took off his leather belt. Julian stood at the top of the stairs, looking down with a triumphant smirk. My mother sat in the living room and simply turned up the volume on the TV to drown out my sobbing. That was how the Sterling family operated. Julian was the king, my parents were his blind subjects, and I was the offering every time something went wrong. Hey, fresh meat. A deep voice cut through my thoughts. I opened my eyes. A massive black man with a long scar running down his cheek was staring at me from the opposite bunk. That was Big Mike. I didn't know it then, but he would become my protector in this hellhole. You look like you've seen a ghost, Mike said. His voice wasn't friendly, but it wasn't hostile either. Worse? I whispered, my voice hoarse. My family. Mike chuckled, a sound like gravel grinding together. Everyone here says that. Family is the first thing to stab you in the back when the chips are down. What did you do? Rob a bank? You don't look like a gangster. I'm a landscape architect. I let out a bitter laugh. And my cop brother says I'm a drug dealer. Mike raised an eyebrow and whistled low. Cop setup? That's heavy. But looking at you, I believe you didn't do it. You've got the eyes of a kicked dog, not a wolf. That phrase reminded me of someone else. The only person in the last 6 months who had looked at me with any warmth. Ben. Or Old Ben, as people called him. I thought back to my lunch breaks, sneaking away from the suffocating office to the Central Park. I met Ben on a pouring rainy day in October. He was huddled under a tree, clothes in tatters, a long gray beard hiding half his face, shaking from the cold. Everyone walked past him like he was invisible, but I saw something familiar in his loneliness. I had bought 2 hot sandwiches and a large coffee, then sat right down in the mud next to him, ruining my dress pants. Want a bite? I asked. He looked up, eyes strangely bright under bushy eyebrows. Why? He rasped. I smell terrible. My life stinks pretty bad right now too. I joked. Let's eat. From then on, we were lunch buddies. I never asked about his past, and he never asked why a young guy in a suit always looked so sad. But Ben was sharp. He knew about the stock market history. He even critiqued my park sketches. This curve, he once said, pointing a grimy finger at my blueprint. It needs to be softer, like water flowing, not concrete forcing. You have talent, Alex. You have your grandfather's eyes. I had started. How do you know about my grandfather? Ben just gave a mysterious smile. I'm good at reading people. He must have been a good man. He died when I was little, I sighed. He was the only one who didn't compare me to my brother. I remembered Ben staying silent for a long time, then placing a rough hand on my shoulder. Remember, Alex, blood doesn't always mean family. And sometimes the poorest men are the richest. Now, lying in this freezing cell, I wondered where Ben was. Was he waiting for me at the park? He was probably the only friend I really had. The next morning, the guard barked my name. Sterling, lawyer. I shuffled to the meeting room, heart pounding. Did Mom come? Did Dad change his mind? I walked in quickly, but the hope died instantly. It wasn't the powerful family lawyer, Mr. Henderson. It was a young woman, about my age, with messy brown hair tied back and a stack of overflowing files. She wore thick-rimmed glasses and looked exhausted, but her eyes were incredibly sharp. Hi, Alex, she said, her voice firm. I'm Sarah Jenkins, your court-appointed public defender. My shoulders slumped. Public defender? My parents? They didn't hire anyone. Sarah looked at me with sympathy, but she didn't sugarcoat it. I contacted your family. Robert Sterling stated he wants nothing to do with this case. He refused to post bail. I dropped my head onto the metal table, hands covering my face. Abandoned. Completely abandoned. Listen, Alex, Sarah said, leaning forward. I know this looks bad. Your brother is the star witness. Evidence was in your car. The whole police department is backing Julian. The papers this morning are already calling you the fallen prince. Then it's over, I said, voice hollow. I'm going to prison. Not yet, Sarah said intensely. She flipped open a file. I just reviewed the arrest report. There are inconsistencies. The timestamp on the log and the time of the anonymous call are too close. Suspiciously close. Like they were waiting. I looked up. You believe me? Why? Everyone thinks I'm guilty. Sarah paused, then said something that gave me chills. Because a mutual friend told me about you. He said you're the best person in that rotten family. Who? Sarah smiled enigmatically. Let's focus on the case first. I'm not the best lawyer in the city. I don't have a skyscraper office, but I hate bullies. And your brother, he's a heavyweight bully. We're gonna fight. Alex, are you ready? I looked at this small woman, the only one willing to stand between me and the Sterling Empire. A tiny spark lit up in the ashes of my heart. "I'm ready," I said. "Let's show them they messed with the wrong guy." But I didn't know the war was going to be bloodier than I imagined. And the real ace up our sleeve hadn't even shown his face yet. The following days were relentless psychological warfare. Sarah worked day and night, but every time she found a glimmer of hope, Julian's side snuffed it out. On my third day in jail, I got an unexpected visitor. "Family visit," the guard grunted. My heart leaped. "Mom? Dad?" I rushed to the visitor's room, but the smile died on my lips. It was Julian. He sat there, arrogant as ever, but this time not in uniform. He wore a sharp, tailored suit. He looked around the filthy room with undisguised disgust. I sat opposite him, not picking up the phone receiver immediately. I stared into my brother's eyes, searching for a shred of humanity. There was nothing, just the cold, dead stare of a shark. I picked up the phone. "Come to laugh at me? I came to give you a way out, you idiot." Julian's voice came through the line, flat and emotionless. "I talked to the district attorney. If you plead guilty, I can get you a plea deal. 5 years. With good behavior, you're out in 3. Plead guilty." I let out a bitter laugh. "To a crime you staged? You think I'm crazy?" Julian sighed like he was explaining algebra to a toddler. "Alex, be realistic. You can't win. Your lawyer? That girl Sarah has been out of law school for 2 years. Me? I have the system. Dad hired Henderson to make sure you don't drag the family name through the mud. They will crush you in court." "Why, Julian?" I asked, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Why do this to your own brother? You have everything. Dad loves you, Mom dotes on you, the career, the money. Why destroy me?" Julian leaned close to the glass, the smirk vanishing. "You think I have everything? You think being the golden child is easy? The pressure, the gambling debts. You don't understand. And more importantly, grandfather's damn will." "Will?" I frowned. "Grandpa died 10 years ago. The assets went to Dad. That's what you think?" Julian sneered, then caught himself. "Listen, I don't have time to explain. Take the deal. If you don't—" He paused, his eyes turning venomous. "You remember Emily?" My blood ran cold. Emily was the girl I had been seeing. A sweet social worker I'd met a few months ago. She was the one good thing in my life. "Don't you touch her," I growled, slamming my fist on the ledge. The guard stepped forward instantly. "I heard she's applying for a PhD scholarship," Julian said casually, inspecting his fingernails. "It would be a shame if her application got flagged because she was associating with a drug dealer. Or worse, if narcotics mysteriously appeared in her condo. You know, search warrants can get messy." "You monster," I shouted. "You're the devil. I'm a survivor, Alex. You're a liability. 24 hours. Think about it." Julian stood up, straightened his tie, and walked away without looking back. I went back to my cell, shaking uncontrollably. He didn't just want me in prison. He wanted to nuke everything I loved. He wanted me on my knees. I didn't sleep that night. I thought about Emily. I couldn't let her get dragged into this. The thought of pleading guilty started to creep in. Maybe it was the only way to protect her. But the next morning, another blow landed. Sarah came to see me, her face pale. "What happened?" I asked immediately. "They have a new witness," Sarah said, voice tight. "The prosecution added a name to the list this morning. Mia." "Mia?" I was stunned. "My ex-girlfriend? We broke up 2 years ago. She gave a statement saying she saw you using and dealing when you were together," Sarah said, tossing a file on the table. "They bought her, Alex. I checked her financials. A massive wire transfer just hit her account from a shell company." I felt sick. Mia, who once said she loved me, selling me out for cash. My family really had no limits. They were sealing every exit. "We lost, didn't we?" I asked, despair washing over me. "Julian threatened Emily. Mia is lying. Dad is paying everyone off. Sarah, maybe I should take the deal. No. Sarah slammed her hand on the table so hard I jumped. Don't you ever say that. If you plead guilty, you lose everything. Your honor, your future, and the truth about your grandfather. What truth? Sarah took a deep breath, lowering her voice. Last night, my office was broken into. They tossed your files. But they didn't find this. She pulled a crumpled envelope from her bag. Inside was a scrap of paper with scrawled handwriting. What is this? It was under my windshield wiper this morning, Sarah said. It just says, check the dashcam of the delivery truck parked opposite the Sterling estate at 8 p.m. Project Phoenix. Who sent this? I asked, bewildered. I don't know, but I followed the lead. I found that delivery company. And Alex. Their camera was rolling while the driver ate dinner. My heart hammered. What did it see? It's grainy. Sarah's eyes lit up. But it shows a figure with a build exactly like Julian walking to your car before you arrived. And it shows him popping the trunk. Oh my God! I gasped. That's proof. It's a lead, Sarah corrected. It's too dark to positively identify his face. It's not a smoking gun, but it casts doubt. We need more. We need a live witness. Someone inside. But who? I asked. Who would dare go against the Sterlings? Sarah tucked the note away. The person who sent this. The person who knows about Project Phoenix. Do you know that phrase? I shook my head. Never heard of it. Sarah looked distant. I have a feeling our helper is close. But we have to survive the trial tomorrow. Alex, promise me. Do not plead guilty. No matter what Julian threatens. Trust me. I looked into Sarah's eyes. In this dark world, she was the only lighthouse. And somewhere out there, a stranger was fighting for me. Okay. I nodded. I'll fight to the end. Trial day arrived with a gray, heavy sky that matched my mood. I was transported from the jail, changing from the orange jumpsuit into a cheap suit Sarah had bought me. It was too broad in the shoulders, making me look small and pathetic. Outside the courthouse was a media circus. Dad's lawyer, Henderson, had been busy. The headlines were brutal. Sterling black sheep netted. Tycoon's son deal drugs at Christmas gala. They painted me as a junkie, jealous of his brother. Rotten to the core. Camera flashes blinded me as I was let in. I kept my head down, trying to block out the crowd screaming insults. Scum! You shamed your family. Those words hurt more than physical blows. Inside, the courtroom was freezing. Sitting at the prosecution table was Julian, sitting tall, looking heroic in his full dress uniform with medals gleaming. He looked like the embodiment of justice. Behind him sat my parents. Dad in a black power suit, face like stone. Mom in oversized sunglasses, dabbing at invisible tears with a handkerchief. Behind me, empty. The benches reserved for the defendant's family were barren. A deafening silence. I felt like a child in timeout, isolated and naked before the judgment of the world. Don't look at them, Sarah whispered, squeezing my hand. Look at me. Judge Miller entered. He was an elderly man with a severe face, known as Maximum Miller, for his harsh sentencing on drug crimes. My heart sank. Luck was not on my side. The trial began. The prosecutor, a balding man with a nasally voice, painted a dark picture of me. He called Julian to the stand. Julian swore on the Bible smoothly. He retold the story of Christmas Eve with perfect, fake emotion. Your Honor, Julian said, voice cracking. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Arresting my own baby brother. It broke my heart. But I am an officer of the law. The law comes first. I couldn't turn a blind eye to crime, even if it's family. The courtroom murmured in admiration. The jury nodded, looking at Julian with sympathy and then at me with disgust. His performance was Oscar-worthy. Next was Mia. She walked up, refusing to meet my eyes. She spun lies about how I used to deal in parking lots, about how I was always desperate for cash. I tried to stop him, Mia sniffled. But Alex was always so jealous of Julian. He wanted quick money to be on his brother's level. I gripped my hands under the table so hard my nails drew blood. The blatant lies were suffocating me. "Our turn," Sarah said, standing up. Sarah started the counterattack. She introduced the grainy dashcam footage. The room held its breath as a shadowy figure opened my trunk on the screen. "Your Honor," Sarah projected. "The figure in this video matches the physical description of Officer Julian Sterling. And note the timestamp, 15 minutes before the anonymous call." The prosecutor objected immediately. "Speculation. The video is too dark. That could be anyone, even the defendant himself." Judge Miller squinted at the screen, then shook his head. "The evidence is inconclusive. Defense, do you have anything concrete?" Sarah bit her lip. We were losing ground. I need more time to summon a witness," Sarah said, voice wavering slightly. "You've had time." Judge Miller banged his gavel. "If there are no further witnesses, we will move to closing arguments." Despair washed over me. This was it. It was over. I looked at Julian. He was smirking, a look of arrogant victory. Dad was checking his watch, like he just wanted to get this over with to make a lunch reservation. They won. Money and power won. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the back of the courtroom. "You can't go in there. Court is in session." A guard yelled, "Get out of my way. I have a right to be here." A raspy but powerful voice boomed, drowning out the noise. The heavy wooden doors burst open. Every eye turned. Standing there was the most wretched-looking man you could imagine. Tattered clothes, covered in grime, an old beanie pulled low, and a long gray beard obscuring his face. It was old Ben. My jaw dropped. "Ben!" Judge Miller banged his gavel furiously. "Order! Bailiff! Remove this man immediately. This is a court of law, not a shelter." Two bailiffs lunged, grabbing Ben's arms. Julian stood up, face pale. "Get that lunatic out of here. He's contaminating the trial." But Ben didn't flinch. He yanked his arms, throwing a bailiff off balance with shocking strength for an old man. He stood tall, his fiery eyes sweeping the room, landing on my father. "Robert!" Ben bellowed, his voice thundering. "Are you really going to let your son rot in prison for your sins?" My father, Robert Sterling, a man who never feared anyone, suddenly turned the color of ash. He stood up, hand trembling as he pointed at the homeless man. "No, impossible," Dad stammered. You're dead." The courtroom went deathly silent. Sarah looked at me, then at Ben, realization dawning in her eyes. "Alex," she whispered, "this is our witness." Ben walked with a limp but with dignity toward the stand, ignoring the guards. He looked straight at Judge Miller. "Your Honor, I have proof that Alexander Sterling is innocent. And I have proof that those two men over there," he pointed a dirty finger at my father and brother, "are the real criminals." "Who are you?" Judge Miller asked, skeptical but intrigued. Ben reached up, grabbing his thick gray beard. "Time to end this charade," he said. And in that moment, I knew the real storm was just beginning. Time seemed to freeze as the homeless man's hand yanked downwards. Rip! The fake beard fell to the floor. The old beanie was tossed aside. He unbuttoned the filthy, oversized coat and let it drop like a rag. Underneath, he was still wearing old clothes, but his posture had transformed. His back straightened, his chin lifted. That face, even though it was gaunt and aged compared to my memories, I recognized it instantly. Those eyes, the same eyes I saw in the mirror, the same eyes as Grandfather William. "Uncle Thomas?" I gasped, the voice breaking in my throat. Thomas Sterling, my father's twin brother, the fun uncle who taught me chess, the man my family said had died in a fiery car crash in Mexico 3 years ago. The murmurs in the courtroom exploded into chaotic shouting. "Order! Order!" Judge Miller hammered his gavel, but no one cared. My father, Robert, collapsed into his chair like a puppet with cut strings. He was white as a sheet, sweating profusely. My mother let out a sharp scream and covered her mouth, eyes wide with terror. Julian stood frozen. The gun at his hip seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. He looked at Thomas like he was seeing a ghost come for vengeance. "Hello, Robert," Thomas said, his voice cold and sharp as a razor. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Oh, right. I was supposed to be at the bottom of a cliff in Cabo. Wasn't I?" "Your Honor." Sarah stepped in quickly, seizing the moment. "I move to call Mr. Thomas Sterling as an emergency witness. He possesses direct evidence regarding this case." "Objection!" Henderson screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "This is a stunt. This man was legally declared dead. This is an imposter." "Imposter!" Thomas laughed, a booming sound. "I have fingerprints, I have DNA, and more importantly, I have this." He pulled a small silver USB drive and a thick file from his pocket. Judge Miller, equally shocked, stared at Thomas, then barked. "Objection overruled. If this is a prank, you're all going to jail for contempt. But if it's real, take the stand." Thomas walked to the witness stand. He looked at me and smiled. A warm, reassuring smile, so different from his fierce entrance. "Sorry to keep you waiting, Alex. I had to wait for the right moment to catch the whole nest of vipers." Sarah began the questioning. "Mr. Sterling, tell the court, why are you here and what really happened?" Thomas took a deep breath. 3 years ago, I discovered that my brother, Robert, and my nephew, Julian, were laundering money through the family real estate firm. They used ghost projects to clean dirty cash for cartels. When I confronted them and threatened to go to the FBI, they acted first. The courtroom was silent, hanging on every word. "They cut the brake lines on my car while I was vacationing in Mexico," Thomas continued, eyes locked on Robert. "I went off a cliff. Luckily, I was thrown clear before the explosion. I was badly injured, had amnesia, and was nursed back to health by locals. When my memory returned, I knew if I came back immediately, they'd finish the job. So, I chose to stay dead. I returned to Chicago as a homeless man, living in the shadows to gather evidence." "And Alex's case?" Sarah asked. "That was the final straw," Thomas said, voice hardening. "Robert and Julian needed a scapegoat. They needed to distract the agencies starting to look into the company finances. And more importantly, they needed to strip Alex of his inheritance." "Inheritance?" the judge asked. "Yes." Thomas held up the file. "This is a copy of the original will of my father, William Sterling. He left 60% of the company shares and a trust fund worth $50 million to Alexander, because Alex was the only one with a good heart. Robert and Julian were merely trustees until Alex turned 30. But if Alex is convicted of a felony, the inheritance automatically transfers to them." A gasp of shock rippled through the room. The motive was clear. Money. It was all for money. "And the evidence of the frame-up?" Sarah asked the kill question. "Open the USB," Thomas pointed. The clerk plugged the drive in. An audio file appeared on the big screen. Static hissed. Then Julian's voice rang out, crystal clear. "Dad, I handled the Alex problem. I planted 2 kilos of product in his spare tire. Tonight, at the party, I'll perform the arrest." Then Robert's voice. "Good. Make it clean. That useless boy finally has a purpose for this family. Once he's in prison, the shares are ours. Don't worry, Dad. He's weak. He won't survive inside. Maybe he'll off himself, and we won't have to worry about the future." The recording ended. The silence in the room was heavy enough to crush bones. I sat there, tears streaming down my face, not from fear, but from pain. They didn't just want me in jail. They wanted me dead. My father, my brother, my blood. "Enough!" Judge Miller roared, face purple with rage. He had never seen such a mockery of justice in his own courtroom. Julian tried to run. He spun around, bolting for the side exit. "Apprehend him," the judge ordered. 2 bailiffs tackled Julian to the floor. The handcuffs, the same kind he put on me, snapped onto his wrists. "No, let me go. I'm a cop." Julian screamed like a wounded animal. In the gallery, my father, Robert, slumped over. Heart attack. Or the shock of total ruin. He clutched his chest, gasping, but no one ran to help him immediately. Every eye looked at him with pure loathing. I stood up, legs shaking. I looked at Thomas, my Uncle Thomas. He stepped down from the stand, arms wide open. "It's over, son," he said as he hugged me tight. "The nightmare is over." I sobbed into his shoulder, letting go of years of burden, years of being the punching bag. For the first time in 28 years, I felt protected. Chaos. That's the only word for the courtroom after the tape ended. Judge Miller banged his gavel, not to restore order, but to issue the harshest commands of his career. "Dismiss all charges against Alexander Sterling immediately," he bellowed. "And I am issuing bench warrants for the arrest of Robert Sterling and Julian Sterling on charges of evidence tampering, perjury, conspiracy to commit murder, and money laundering. No bail." Police swarmed my father. The man who used to breathe fire, who made the city bow to him, now looked pathetic. He didn't fight. He just sat there, eyes glazed over, muttering, "My money, my empire." Julian wasn't going quietly. As they dragged him past me, he thrashed, eyes wild. He spat at my feet. "You didn't win. I'll kill you. I swear I'll kill you." I looked him dead in the eye, zero fear left in my body. "You're wrong, Julian. You died the moment you sold your soul." And then, one more twist happened that I didn't see coming. My mother, Eleanor. As they cuffed Robert, she jumped up. She pointed a manicured finger at the husband she had stood by for 30 years. Her face twisted in fear and calculation. "Arrest him. It was him," she shrieked. "He forced me to stay silent. I knew Alex was innocent. I begged him to stop, but he threatened to cut off my credit cards. I'm a victim. I'll testify against him." The whole room looked at her with disgust. Even at the end, she only thought of herself. She was ready to throw her husband and son under the bus to keep her seat at the country club. I walked over to the railing. My mother saw me, her eyes lighting up with desperate hope. She lunged, grabbing my hand. "Alex, my baby boy," she wailed, tears streaking her expensive mascara. "You know Mommy loves you, right? I was manipulated. Tell the police, honey. Don't let them take me. We can start over. We still have your inheritance, right?" I looked down at the hand clutching my sleeve. The hand covered in diamond rings but cold as ice. I remembered Christmas Eve, when I begged her for a look, and she turned away. I remembered the childhood beatings where she just turned up the volume. I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off my arm. "No, Mom," I said, my voice strangely calm. "You aren't a victim. You're an accomplice. Your silence was more violent than Dad's actions. And as for the money, you will never touch a cent of it." I turned my back and walked away, leaving her screaming as the officers politely invited her to the station for questioning. Outside the courthouse, fresh air rushed into my lungs. The gray sky had broken, letting through weak but warm shafts of sunlight. Reporters swarmed, but Thomas and Sarah acted as my human shields. "We need a drink," Thomas said, clapping my shoulder. He was still wearing his homeless rags underneath, but the billionaire aura was back. We went to a quiet diner, away from the noise. Thomas ordered black coffee and told me the full story of his 3 missing years. "I lived like a ghost, Alex," he said, staring into his cup. "When I woke up in that fisherman's hut, I didn't know who I was. It took a year for the memory to return. And when it did, I knew I couldn't go home. Robert controlled everything. The police, the lawyers. I needed ironclad proof." "So you pretended to be homeless?" I asked. "Exactly. No one looks at a beggar. I went through the company dumpsters. I eavesdropped on Robert's meetings at sidewalk cafes. And I watched you." Thomas smiled, putting a hand on mine. "I saw how hard you worked. I saw you help people even when you were struggling. You are more like Grandfather William than anyone. He would be so proud." And Sarah? I turned to the young lawyer sitting next to me, the woman who saved my life. How did you know her? Sarah was a recipient of my secret scholarship fund back in the day. Thomas winked. She was the only one I trusted with this plan. She took a huge risk protecting you. I looked at Sarah. She blushed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I just did what was right, Alex. Thank you, I said sincerely. You aren't just my lawyer. You're my hero. Thomas's phone buzzed. He checked the message and gave a cold smile. Good news, he said. Police just raided Julian's penthouse. They found a stockpile of drugs and ledgers of gambling debts. He's done. And Robert, business partners are already filing lawsuits. The Sterling Empire is crumbling faster than a sandcastle in a tsunami. I let out a long breath. Justice. The people who hurt me were paying the price. So, what's the plan? Thomas asked. With 60% of the shares and $50 million? You're the richest man at this table. I looked out the window at the people rushing by. I thought about my unfinished park projects, about the kids who needed green spaces to play. I thought about Emily, who I needed to find immediately to explain everything. I won't become dad, I said firmly. I won't let money turn me into a monster. I'm going to use it to fix what they broke. And I want you to help me run the company, Uncle Thomas. I'm an architect, not a CEO. Thomas laughed, slapping the table. Deal. We'll clean up Robert's mess together. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. But I knew there was one more thing I had to do. One final meeting to close this painful chapter forever. The first morning of my freedom didn't feel like an explosion of joy. Felt like silence. For the first time in 28 years, I woke up without the crushing weight of expectation on my chest. There were no insults waiting for me at the breakfast table. No judgmental stares. Just the hum of the city outside my window and the realization that the monster under my bed, my own family, was finally locked away. But freedom came with a mess. A massive $50 million mess. 2 days after the trial, Uncle Thomas picked me up. He wasn't driving a Rolls-Royce or a flashy sports car. He pulled up in a sensible black SUV. He looked different too. The beard was trimmed neatly, and he wore a suit that whispered power rather than shouted it. Ready to go to work, boss? He grinned. Don't call me that, I groaned, buckling my seatbelt. I still feel like the guy who eats sandwiches in the mud. That guy is the reason we won, Thomas said, his face turning serious. Never forget him. Now let's go take back what's ours. We drove to the Sterling Development headquarters. It was a glass skyscraper that pierced the Chicago skyline, a monument to my father's ego. I used to hate this building. I used to feel small just standing in its shadow. Today, I own 60% of it. Walking into the lobby was surreal. The receptionist, a woman named Janice who used to pretend she was on the phone whenever I walked in to visit Dad, nearly fell out of her chair. Mr. Sterling, she stammered, her face pale. We weren't expecting you. Clearly, I said, not breaking stride. Is the board assembled? Yes, sir. Conference room A. Thomas and I rode the elevator in silence. When the doors opened on the top floor, the air was thick with tension. The boardroom was filled with men and women in expensive suits. My father's inner circle. These were the people who had enabled him, who had looked the other way while he laundered money and destroyed lives. They all stood up when we entered. The fear in the room was palpable. I sat at the head of the table. My father's chair felt too big, but Thomas pulled up a chair right next to me. Let's make this simple, I began, my voice steady. I didn't need to shout. The inheritance gave me a volume that carried across the room. You all know what happened in court. My father and brother are facing decades in prison. The reputation of this company is in the toilet. A heavy silence followed. I am not my father, I continued. I don't care about profit margins if they come at the cost of human dignity. I don't care about building luxury condos for criminals. We are pivoting. Pivoting, sir? The CFO asked nervously. We are liquidating the luxury division, I announced. We are shifting our assets to affordable housing and community development, and we are starting an internal investigation. Anyone in this room who knew about my father's illegal activities has exactly 1 hour to resign. If you stay and we find out you were involved, we hand you over to the FBI. By lunch, half the boardroom was empty. It was a bloodbath, but it was necessary. We were cutting out the rot. Thomas stayed by my side the whole time, guiding me, translating the complex legalese, teaching me how to wield my new power without letting it corrupt me. That evening, I finally turned my phone back on. It had been blowing up for days. Hundreds of texts from friends who hadn't spoken to me in years. Suddenly remembering what a great guy I was now that I was a multimillionaire. I deleted them all. But there was one voicemail that made my stomach churn. Alex, it's Mom. Her voice was shaky, slurred. She had been drinking. I'm at the Four Seasons. Well, the lobby. They won't let me check in because the credit cards are frozen. Alex, baby, please. You can't let your mother sleep on the street. I made a mistake. I was scared of him. Please, bring me some cash. Or just come get me. I sat there in my small apartment, the phone pressing against my ear. A part of me, the little boy who just wanted his mommy to hug him, wanted to run to her. She was my mother. She gave birth to me. But then I remembered the courtroom. I remembered her pointing at Dad not to save me, but to save herself. I remembered her silence when I was handcuffed. I didn't delete the voicemail. I saved it. A reminder of what happens when you chose money over loyalty. I texted Sarah, my lawyer and savior. Mom is calling. What do I do? Sarah replied instantly, you owe her nothing. She is under investigation for aiding and abetting. If you give her money, it could look like you're funding a flight risk. Stay away, Alex. Let the system handle her. I put the phone down. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, harder than facing Julian. But I knew that if I let her back in, the toxicity would start all over again. I had to choose my peace. The next day, I drove to a small coffee shop on the outskirts of the city. I was nervous. My palms were sweating on the steering wheel of the sensible SUV Thomas had convinced me to buy. I walked in and saw her in the corner booth. Emily. She looked tired. Her eyes were red-rimmed. When she saw me, she stood up, her hands trembling. Alex, she breathed. I said softly. She rushed forward and buried her face in my chest. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have come to the jail. I should have stood up for you. I held her tight, smelling her familiar vanilla shampoo. Shoo, it's okay. Julian told me he threatened you. She pulled back, tears streaming down her face. He came to my apartment the night you were arrested. He showed me pictures of my parents' house. He said if I talked to anyone, if I tried to help you, he'd plant evidence on my dad. I was so scared, Alex. I felt like a coward. You weren't a coward, I said, wiping a tear from her cheek. You were a victim, just like me. He used everyone we loved against us. We sat down and talked for hours. I told her about Thomas, about the trial, about the company. I told her I was scared of becoming like them. You won't, Emily said, taking my hand across the table. You know how I know? Because the first thing you did with your freedom wasn't to buy a yacht. It was to come here and forgive me. That was the moment I knew I was going to be okay. I had Thomas, I had Sarah, and I had Emily. I was building a new foundation, not made of money or lies, but of trust. A week later, the news broke. Real estate tycoon denied bail. Former Golden Boy cop faces 30 years. I watched the report on TV with Thomas in my new office. They showed footage of my father being led out of the courthouse in an orange jumpsuit. He looked old, defeated. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man who realizes his legacy is dust. Julian's mugshot was next. He looked deranged. His eyes were wide, angry. Reports said he was fighting with other inmates, screaming that he was a police officer and demanding respect. He wasn't going to last long in general population. Do you feel bad for them? Thomas asked, pouring 2 cups of coffee. I looked at the screen. I searched my heart for pity. I feel bad for the little boy who lived in that house, I said quietly. I feel bad for the brother who wanted a protector and got a bully. But for those men on the screen, no, they made their choices. That's right, Thomas nodded. They dug their own graves. We're just filling them in. Life moved fast after that. With the salary from my CEO position and the dividends from the trust, I had more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But I didn't change my lifestyle much. I bought a nice house. Not a mansion, just a warm, spacious home with a huge backyard for a garden. I hired Sarah as the company's general counsel. She was a pit bull in the courtroom, and I needed someone who wasn't afraid to tell me the truth. We set up a college fund for the children of the families my father had evicted over the years. We started paying reparations. We were trying to wash the blood off the Sterling money. One afternoon, 6 months later, I got a call from the prison. Inmate 8940 requests a visitation, the voice on the line said. It was Julian. My first instinct was to hang up. Why reopen the wound? But Thomas looked at me. Closure isn't about them, Alex. It's about you. If you need to see him to close the door, do it. If not, let him rot. I thought about it. I thought about the fear I used to feel when he walked into a room. I realized I didn't feel that fear anymore. I was curious. I wanted to see the monster without his teeth. I'll go, I said. The prison visiting room was a stark contrast to the Sterling dining room. No chandeliers, no silver cutlery, just concrete, steel, and bulletproof glass. I sat down. On the other side of the glass, a door buzzed open. Julian walked in. He was unrecognizable. The golden child was gone. In his place was a gaunt, shaved-headed inmate. He had a black eye and his lip was split. He sat down heavily, not meeting my eyes at first. He picked up the phone. I picked up mine. Hello, Julian. He looked up. His eyes were full of hate, but beneath the hate was something pathetic. Desperation. You look good, he sneered, his voice cracking. Suit fits better than the jumpsuit. It does, I said calmly. What do you want? I need money, Alex, he whispered, glancing around nervously. I need protection. They know I was a cop. I'm a target in here. You have to put money in my commissary account. You owe me. I owe you. I almost laughed. I owe you for the handcuffs? For the drugs in my trunk? For threatening Emily? I'm your brother, he hissed, slamming his hand on the counter. Dad made me do it. It was all him. He said we had to protect the inheritance. I was just following orders. You're 33 years old, Julian. You're not a child following orders. You enjoyed it. I saw your face that night. You loved the power. Please, he begged, his bravado crumbling. Tears leaked from his eyes. They're going to kill me in here. Just a few thousand. It's nothing to you now. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had tormented me my entire life. The man who had everything and threw it away because of greed. No, I said softly. What? No money. No lawyers. No help. You are exactly where you belong. You selfish bastard, he screamed, spitting on the glass. I hope you die. I hope that old man Thomas dies. I stood up. I didn't feel angry. I felt nothing. He was a stranger to me. Goodbye, Julian, I said. Try not to break any more laws. I hung up the phone and walked out. I could hear him screaming behind the glass, but the sound faded as I passed through the heavy security doors. I walked out into the sunlight, took a deep breath of fresh air, and got into my car. I never looked back. Christmas Eve, 1 year later. My house smelled like cinnamon, roasted turkey, and real pine needles. Not the suffocating scent of the mansion, but the warm, messy smell of a real home. There were no guests in tuxedos. No business partners trying to cut deals. In the kitchen, Emily was laughing as she tried to stop the cranberry sauce from boiling over. Sarah was sitting at the island counter, arguing playfully with Uncle Thomas about a chess move. Big Mike, yes, the guy from jail, was by the oven. I had hired him as my head of security once he got out. It turned out he was a gentle giant who made the best cornbread in Chicago. "Dinner is served," Mike bellowed. We gathered around the table. It wasn't a long, formal table. It was round, so no one was at the head. We were all equal. I looked around at them. Thomas, the uncle who came back from the dead to save me. Sarah, the stranger who fought for me when no one else would. Emily, the love of my life who forgave me and helped me heal. Mike, the friend who watched my back in the darkest hour. This was my family. Not by blood, but by choice. "A toast," Thomas said, raising his glass of cider. "To the black sheep." "To the black sheep," everyone cheered. I smiled, raising my glass. "To the pack," I corrected. We ate, we laughed, we shared stories. There was no tension, no fear of saying the wrong thing, no judgment on my salary or my job title. After dinner, Thomas and I stood by the fireplace. Above the mantel, I had hung a picture of Grandfather William. "He knew, didn't he?" I asked, looking at the kind eyes in the portrait. "He knew Dad would turn on me." "He suspected," Thomas said, swirling his drink. "William knew that money reveals character. It doesn't change people, Alex. It just amplifies who they already are. It made Robert a monster. It made Julian a bully. But you," he poked me in the chest. "He knew that if you had power, you'd build tables, not walls." "I still miss them sometimes," I admitted, my voice quiet. "Not who they were, but who I wanted them to be." "That's the grief talking," Thomas said. "It's okay to mourn the potential, but never mourn the poison." I looked out the window. The snow was falling again, just like that night a year ago. But this time I wasn't shivering in a cold car. I was warm. I was safe. And for the first time in my life, I was home. I had lost a family that night, yes, but I had found something much stronger. I found the truth, and the truth had set me free. Friends, thank you for taking this journey with me. As I sit here today, telling you this story, I want you to take away 3 crucial lessons that cost me a lifetime of pain to learn. First, blood does not make a family. Loyalty, love, and mutual respect make a family. You are not obligated to tolerate abuse just because it comes from a parent or a sibling. You have the right to walk away from toxicity, no matter who it comes from. Second, integrity is the only currency that matters. My father and brother had millions of dollars, prestige, and power. But in the end, it couldn't buy them freedom or peace. They built their castle on sand, and the truth washed it away. When you live with honesty, you never have to fear the knock on the door or the text message that exposes you. And finally, your current situation is not your final destination. I was in a jail cell, mocked, broke, and alone. Felt like the end. But it was just the chapter before the breakthrough. If you are going through hell right now, keep walking. Help is often found in the most unexpected places, like a homeless man in a park or a public defender with a messy bun. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to cut ties with a toxic family member to save your own peace? Or maybe you found your chosen family, like I did. Tell me one thing you learned from my story in the comments. Or, if this story touched you, just comment good below so I know we are connected. Thank you for watching, and remember, the best revenge is a life well lived.